Hey, I'm your host, Mari Wagner, and you're listening to the Ever Be podcast, where faith meets lifestyle. I'm so excited you're here. Whether you're a new listener or a longtime follower, I know there's something here for you. Pull up a chair and listen in for insightful, real-life conversations and actionable steps on how to claim the full life God created you for. If you're a woman desiring to live a Christ-centered life in today's modern world, then this is for you. Welcome to Ever Be. Hey guys, welcome back to Ever Be. Today we have a very exciting guest, Beth Sri. She is an author and she's going to be sharing a little bit more about her in a second. But basically how this came to be is I have a marriage group with a few other married friends that we have that we meet once a month. And we recently read one of Beth's books that she wrote with her husband, Beth Sri. It's called The Good, the Messy, and the Beautiful. And it was such a wonderful book to allow us to have good conversations around what is a good God-centered marriage really supposed to look like, what are areas we can grow in, as well as just some good laughs. You had some good stories in there that definitely brought us some laughter and joy to our conversation. So welcome, Beth. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Thanks. So good to be here, Mari.
Can you share a little bit about who you are? Maybe just give us an introduction.
Sure. So, my name's Beth Sri. We have been married for 25 years and we have 8 children. We actually just became grandparents this past summer.
Oh,
which
exciting.
is absolutely fantastic. It was one of those things where it was like, oh, it's so amazing. I'm like, okay, I believe you. I don't have any concept. And I just have to say it's way better than I would ever realized. And they live close to us, which is the literal best. And he's just, I just adore them. It's so fun to see my daughter as a mom too. That part has just been fantastic. So,
That is so
we have 8 kids, 5 girls, 3 boys. Our oldest is 24, our youngest is 8. That's the essentials right there.
You are an experienced wife and mother.
I've done a lot of things, a lot of well, and probably even more things not so well. So,
Oh, amazing. Well, let's just dive right in. I kind of just want to start off with a basic question, but how can newlyweds set the foundation for a thriving marriage early on? Like, what are some things that we can do early on? And by newlyweds, I feel like we're talking like first 5 years of marriage, I think is a pretty standard term for, being called a newlywed. So what are some things that we can do as newlyweds to really set a really strong foundation from the start?
yeah, so this is a great question. I guess I would approach it more like remembering why you got married in the first place. It's so easy to kind of get stuck in the complication or the drudgery or the familiarity even of life together. So if you can remember the good things about your spouse, why you chose him, and then bring those regularly to mind, I think is a great practice with anyone, whether it's our spouse, our children, our friends, our parents, our siblings, to really just honor the goodness that is there and know that the person standing in front of us is fully human, which means coexists with a lot of absurdity and a lot of woundedness and a lot of other things. And that doesn't lessen the goodness of the person with us.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. What would you say are some common pitfalls couples might face in those first years, and how can we overcome them?
Yeah, I have to say the questions going back to the beginning of all of this, it's hard for me to connect. I was such a different person back in the day. Like seriously. And I don't think there were nearly as many, there wasn't as much knowledge and information available. Yeah. I mean, I had friends who were ahead of me in the stage of life, and they were my go-tos. Few books, there weren't podcasts. You know what I mean? Like I'm showing my age here. But Yeah, so what can you do to rephrase the question for me, will you?
Yeah, just like, I feel like those first few years of marriage, like we just have such good intentions, but there's often um maybe like common ways that people fall short or just some common pitfalls that you might fall into as a married couple as you're learning to love each other well. What do you feel like are some of those common pitfalls and how can we it's hard to say like how can we avoid them because in our humanness, like you said, we're always going to encounter brokenness and sin and our own selfishness in so many ways. And marriage reveals that to us for sure. But what would your advice be, to kind of what are those common pitfalls and how can you work on them? How can you grow?
Yeah, I think self-awareness is the first one. To really be able to acknowledge I'm hurting my spouse here,
Mm,
or my spouse is hurting me here, and to name that without shutting down, to name it without giving into the anger that might accompany it, and just acknowledge it and say, I'm feeling disappointed. I'm feeling misunderstood. I'm feeling invisible. I'm feeling unlovable. I know you love me. And for whatever reason, maybe it's my previous wounding, I'm not feeling it right now.
mhm,
We can just name vulnerably and honestly what's going on here, which that in itself is like next level, because in order to say it, you have to know what's going on in your body and your heart and your mind and your soul,
mm.
and be familiar enough with your own movements to sense within, oh, that's grief, oh, that's fear, and then to have the safety in your relationship to say it.
Yeah.
um, and I'm saying this now in my late 40s,
Yeah.
and this is a new skill for me. So I wouldn't want to put this on someone who's like newly married, because I think there are natural progressions that happen when one first gets married. I mean, there's the newness of it all and the excitement and your whole future stretching out in front of you.
Mhm.
And you don't know which way it's going to go. I mean, I liken marriage to Space Mountain, the roller coaster in the dark at Disneyland. You buckle up, you get in that little car, and that's your vows, your wedding day. And then you don't know which way you're going.
So
Are
true.
you going up, down, sideways, upside down, backwards? You don't know. You just know the person who's next to you. You
Mhm.
know the person who brought you together. And you know that you're in it to win it, but you don't know what life and your marriage and your vocation is going to throw at you. Nobody does.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And so I love that you're talking, your advice here is like to really lean into transparency with your spouse as well as like really like leaning into your heart and like identifying like okay like what is it that I am feeling, what is it that I'm experiencing, where is this coming from, having that self-awareness. Now one thing, if you want can touch on it a little bit, I feel like where people struggle with this is a lot of the times I find people struggle with like real honesty, either with other people or with their spouse. And I think a lot of times the misconception is that if you're brutally honest, it automatically leads to conflict and people want to avoid conflict. So how can you grow in this skill of honesty, or maybe like what can we do to receive our spouse when they're being honest to kind of encourage this practice of just like transparency, without there just naturally being a defense that lines up with that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Again, this is like next level skill here. And generally speaking, a lot of us grew up in homes where conflict was either shrouded or there was a tension you could feel, but maybe there wasn't a blow up. Or maybe for some of us, there was intense conflict in the home that actually led to amputation and rupture in the form of our parents separating or divorcing.
Mhm.
That's a very real place to come from, because all of that gets stored inside of us,
Mhm.
whether we're conscious of it or not. And so we're very careful to not repeat those things,
Mhm.
or our body, trauma is in the body. And so it's a sort of template that we see the world through. And so when we get in similar situations, without us even thinking about it, we will react in ways as if what's happening in front of us with our beloved is in the past. Um, and so it can take a lot to say, okay, time out. That's not where we are. I am actually safe here. You are my husband, my wife. We are sacramentally married. We are together before God. I have chosen you before all others to be with me in this lifetime. You have made a commitment of your life to me, and I want to be honest with you. And I know, because I know you, it could hurt you.
Mhm.
And I just feel so much for anyone in that spot. I mean, I've been in that spot. That is a really tough place to be. And if we really want to grow, then we will say the thing, but in a way that we can hope it would be heard.
Mhm.
And again, sometimes we need support around us, not our spouse, but maybe a therapist, spiritual director, mentor, good friend, somebody that can hold space for us that maybe we take the feelings to first, to like as a check. Hey, is this legit? Should I be feeling this way? I don't know. Am I off base here? And then have them be a sort of mirror to us and say, yeah, that makes sense. It'd be good to bring that up. But I think sometimes when we tiptoe around conflict, it really doesn't serve us. We may have peace. We don't have shalom. And
Mm.
shalom is it's a Hebrew word and we hear it in the Bible, but it's not just peace. It's often translated as peace. Well, what it actually means is right relationship, where
Wow.
it's deeper than just like a peace of sorts, absence of war.
Yeah.
It's we are really for each other. We are really with each other, and we are really united.
United. One thing you said that I really liked was, well, you mentioned how we often like know that we are loved by our spouse. Like you know that deep in your heart. And yet there's something that feels like, why am I not feeling it? Like I know you love me, but why do I, for some reason, not feel loved? And I feel like in my husband and I, we've been married 3.5 years, and we've absolutely had these conversations where we're like, I know you love me, but I don't feel loved, And it is brave to say that, first of all, to really come to that conclusion of just like, why are we missing each other? And I think it's so helpful to name that, especially in conflict, just to remind each other of that, to kind of like almost like bring your guard down and like lessen those walls of like, I know we're in a heated discussion, or I know we're talking about something really painful. Let me just remind you, like, I do love you. Or, if the other person, like, I know that you love me. I'm like trying to hold on to that, but here's how I feel. And I think those first few years of marriage, can be beautiful and exciting, but also like messy as you're learning to love each other. And part of the selflessness of marriage is learning to love each other in the way that your spouse receives love best, not always the way that is most natural to us. And so while you're like really learning to do that well, I think it's always good to just do what you were saying of just like coming to each other in transparency and just always giving each other that reminder of like, I do love you, and this is what I'm feeling, or like, I know you love me, but yet I think we're missing the mark here. Like, can we just have a conversation about it? And just being really open to like receiving whatever your spouse is feeling, even if it is hurtful to hear that they're not being loved, because in the end, like we're always trying our best to love our spouse. And it hurts when you hear like, oh wow, like I'm trying, but like it's not being received that way. Um, this just reminds me of one of the stories in your book that I really loved was you were talking about gift giving and how that is like a love language that you have, and how your husband noticed that you really liked this certain type of maple syrup. And so for your birthday, he like bought you all these cases of maple syrup, and he was like, "Yes, like I nailed it. Like I'm so intentional. Like I finally got the gift right." And oh, we all laughed when we read, and you're like, "But I'm your wife." Like, like maple syrup. Why would you get your wife maple syrup? So talk to me a little bit about that, a little bit about maybe like love languages. I think that's something that is such a growth has been for us, like a growth spurt in our marriage, like learning to love each other in each other's love languages. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it is exactly a love language. So when someone's not picking up on, I know you love me and I don't feel it, there's a miss there, like we're not speaking the same language.
Mm.
And so So love language, I think the concept really unlocks that in a certain way. Um, I think there's way more ways to love someone than just the 5 that are offered, but it's a great starting point, you know?
Mhm.
So yeah, so I've realized like I think in general that just like there are certain ways that my husband, my family really receive my love. If we could add more love languages, my husband loves food. He loves like really well prepared, home cooked meals, especially Italian ones. There's a particular pasta he wishes I made more often. I usually make it for his birthday and other, especially my son-in-law has actually started asking for it because he knows he likes it as much as my husband does. It's not that I don't like making it, it's I don't have a good recipe. And so it's a stress thing because I combine 2
Yes.
recipes. You never know how it's going to turn out.
What kind of pasta is it?
It's called norcina.
Okay, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's really not that hard. It's basically, a sausage without fennel, but with cream
Mhm.
and then caramelized onions.
Yum.
It's pretty basic, but there are certain things that are just a lot for me to pull together. So when we joke about, "Oh, are you making norcina?" I'm like, no." But I am making something that, your mom's soup recipe or a matriciana or carbonara, all these different things. So anyway, knowing like there are certain things that I can do for him that we communicated, he's expressed and I've received that he feels loved. When as soon as he walks in the door coming home, I light up and smile and go over to him and give him a hug.
Yeah.
Even if I'm like having the worst day, even if like I just, did something really dumb or am feeling blah about something, when he's home, if I can just take the 30 seconds to stop, smile, engage, that can really set us on the tone for, having a really beautiful evening together.
Mhm.
Um, don't do that. It's not the end of the world. It's just, it's like a missed opportunity. And then there are things for him as well that I just need him to do. For instance, when we first were married, we'd be in bed talking at night before we're about to doze off. And we had a custom of always saying our prayers together at that time. And we'd be talking, and then all of a sudden he would just say, "In the name of the Father, Son," and he would just start praying. And I'm like, oriented. And then I finally said, "Ask, are you ready to pray?"
Yes.
Sometimes I'm still thinking we're talking and you've decided we're done and you go to pray. And he was like, "Oh, yeah, totally."
That's such a guy thing.
It totally is. But I can appreciate where he's coming
Yeah.
from. He's like, "I'm tired. I don't want to keep going on.
Yes.
Let's close it down, you know?"
My husband does something similar. We'll be chatting and there'll be a moment of silence, and then we have an Alexa in the room, and he'll just be like, "Alexa, turn the lights off." I'm like, "Okay, I guess we're done chatting. I guess it's time to go to bed now." Just that communication piece, you know?
It can be a little jarring, especially if we both share something that's, on the more vulnerable side
Sure.
or something more dear to our hearts, and then something like that happens. Again, they don't mean anything by it. Their intention is good, and it can still impact us negatively.
Yeah.
And so that's where we can just bring it up and be like, "Hey, I know you didn't mean this, and it hurt. What can we do differently next time?"
Mhm. Yeah. Amazing. So your book speaks about the embracing like the messiness of marriage and just kind of like knowing that that's going to come with marriage and really embracing it. How do you feel like newlyweds can approach this messiness and this conflict in a way that actually can strengthen their bond instead of tear it down?
Yeah, this is the $1,000,000 question, right?
Mhm.
Um, I think it's knowing I think if okay, we've heard young couples many times over, and I think even the 2 of us were this way, where you're engaged, you're getting married, and you're like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, we know people suffer in marriage. We know that some people struggle, but we're gonna do it differently. We're going to keep Jesus in the middle and we're going to show people, how it's done. People are going to come to our wedding and have these conversion experiences because they're so palpably feeling that God is present here." And I love that desire. It's noble. It's countercultural. It's really making a stand for God and the beauty of the sacrament. Fast forward, those same couples that have this beautiful vision and hope and desire start to struggle. And it can be really easy to just feel intense shame over that. I'm not good enough. We just aren't enough. We couldn't hack it. We thought we were this, and look, we're just as bad as everybody else, or something like that. Um, and I would just encourage any couple that's thinking that, or any spouse that's thinking that, to just really consider the sacrament's working. When God looks down on the couple, he sees a unity. He sees one. That word cling in the book of Genesis can actually be translated to mean glue, that you are glued to your spouse. And so the fact that you're not perfectly getting along and perfectly growing and having perfect bliss means that the sacrament is working. It means that God is working to chisel the two of you down so that you fit better together, and
Mhm.
that you fit better into the plan that he has for you. It's a part of the process. It's not something to say, oh no, what have we done? Or we shouldn't have done this. Or maybe we just weren't meant to be, or we're not cut out for marriage, or I'm not this way. It's actually no, rather, God is here. He has drawn us together, and he is drawing us to himself through these difficulties. That doesn't make them less hard. And you still may need outside help. And that is totally fine. It makes sense. We can't do this Christian thing alone. But it's not a sign of that needs to be turned into shame or fear or anything else that's going to keep us from the heart of God and what he has for us.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful reminder, and I think very, um, just relatable to Catholic circles, especially. I know that being a missionary myself, in when we first started out our marriage, and being kind of in those like more like just like hyper Catholic circles, when you're in that Catholic community and you're surrounded by so many wonderful people who are genuinely striving for holiness, genuinely striving for a Christ centered life. That was something I hadn't encountered before I really got involved as a missionary. And it was encouraging and beautiful. But I think anybody who's really involved in those kind of communities can relate to what you're saying. Like, there is this like beautiful zeal of like, we are going to do this. Like, we are going to be that God centered couple, like in our community, in our culture. And like, and it's all going to be great. And it's almost like you feel exempt from like the difficulties of marriage because you have like God so promptly in your personal life, and you're like, oh my gosh, like, because we're these faithful Catholics, like we probably won't struggle with these things in our marriage. And I just think it's, yeah, just encouraging and refreshing to hear the words that you had to say, and always to remember that it's not a place of shame, because I think that's so often where the enemy wants to take us, of like, oh, you thought you were going to be a good Catholic couple, and you're struggling. Man, that's shameful, and we know that that's not of the Lord. So yeah, I think one more thing too, if you could just speak into like couples that really want to have a God-centered marriage. What role do faith and prayer play in navigating just like all that there is in marriage, and how can we really set a foundation of Christ at the center of our marriage?
Yeah. I mean, there are certain practices, obviously, the church has lined out for us: going to mass on Sundays, holy days of obligation, devotional prayers, things like that. Liturgical living, it's not like prescribed necessarily, aside from Lent and Friday penances and whatnot. So I feel like the church, in her wisdom, gives us a lot of guardrails that are firm, but then flexibility. So I think primarily praying as individuals. There are times where, and this is something we wrote about as well, where Ted and I, okay, his name's Edward, but he goes by Ted, just to
Yes.
clarify. Some people get really confused. So the only thing you can't call him is Ed, because that's my dad's name. So I
Oh,
get very confused if you call my husband
God.
Ed, because
Ted.
so Ted or Edward. But yeah, because we both, from our formation before we were married, we were both committed to daily prayer. And so we just continued that. In the midst of early marriage, it was easy to do together. And then as the kids started coming, that was a little bit more complicated. And I mean, my prayer has evolved over many years and many different ways. But I really think that just the faithfulness to showing up, to meet with our Lord each day, to have that conversation with him, to really seek him first, um, really just gave us the light and the fullness and the grace and the capacity to then encounter and serve one another, and then our children and the other people that were in our lives. It's almost like if you have a lamp next to your bed, if it's not plugged in, it's not doing much of anything.
Hmm.
But it has to be plugged in order to do what it was made for and shine light on the surroundings, its environment. And so similarly, to be a wife, to be a husband, to be a mom or a dad or a son or daughter of God, if you're not plugged in to daily prayer, um, are you really going to be able to shine the light of Christ on those around you as fully if you're not united to him, if he's not your source, if he's not animating your person? Um, and I have to say, like, full disclosure, our prayer was not beautiful, fantastic, consoling, like just awesome every single day. There were many times for both of us that it was dry, it felt
Mhm.
rote. We felt like we were just, punching the clock and checking the box. And God still used that. And
Mm.
God still worked that. Sometimes through our failures and difficulties. There's times where I remember talking to an old spiritual director, and I'm like, I had the horrible day. This happened, and this kid, and then my husband, and dinner, and blah. And she's like, well, did you pray? And I'm like, yes, and that's what makes it crazy. And she's like, think about if you didn't pray. And I'm like, well, it would have been even more off the rails, And not that we pray and we have good days, or we
Yeah,
pray and everything's great, but there is something about committing to it, being faithful to it, and showing up, that God has something to work with that. And he does come to us, and he does give us more of his life when we show
absolutely.
up.
Yeah, and it's just grace. I mean, I totally relate to that, and like you said, it's not like prayer is like a genie lamp that we're rubbing to, like, make everything perfect, but I do definitely experience, like, the days when I prioritize prayer, even in the midst of, like, the craziest day where I'm like, "There is no way I can set aside time to be with the Lord," the day that I actually prioritize the Lord and do that. Either things magically get done, or even if they don't, there's still, like, a stillness and a peace about my heart of just like, "Okay, it's not gonna fall apart, and that's fine," and those are just, like, the graces the Lord gives us when we meet him in prayer. Okay, you mentioned that your prayer has evolved over the years and that in different seasons of life, I'm sure with children and as you have more kids, yeah, it looks differently. Can you just share maybe, like, what has prayer looked like in different seasons? Because I think that's a conversation um, people really need to hear. People hear a lot about prayer, but a lot of the times we don't know what that looks like in different people's lives. And I think when we go from one season to the next, maybe newly married to one kids to two kids, there's a lot of questions around, like, what could my prayer life look like right now? So can you just shed some light on, like, what does it look like in different seasons of your life? What are some different examples of what people can be praying?
Yeah, so we've in the book we talk about faithful and flexible. Faithful that you're just committed to it, and flexible that you're willing to roll with it and do it differently based on the ever-changing seasons. Um, Also within focus, as I'm sure you've heard, we've often talked about prayer as being first fruits, and the ideal time to pray, again, ideal,
Yeah.
not like only, is first thing in the morning. You've got your coffee and you are in the scriptures or the mass readings or your devotional, whatever it is, but you are connecting straight out of the gates. Physiologically, it's a great time to pray. And then mentally, waking up, it orders your day. You're seeing with the vision of Christ and you're ready to go. Um, as I grew in my motherhood, there is no way, because if I were to go downstairs, it could be game over before I even start. And sometimes, when kids were little, they're waking me up, or I'm up all night with a baby.
Yeah.
Um, and so I took first fruits in a different way, and it was the first moment where I had choice. Maybe the baby was taking a nap, or maybe the toddlers were watching a show, or maybe they were consumed by a game or something. And all of a sudden I'm like, ooh, I might have 20 minutes here. What am I going to do? Am I going to fold the laundry? Am I going to, get online and scroll through Instagram? Am I going to text that person back? Like, what am I going to do with this pocket of time that all of a sudden I have? And that became my first fruit.
Mm.
Now I'm going to claim this time. I don't know how long I have, but I'm going to, take out my devotional or the Bible or whatever it is, and really attempt to encounter God in prayer. It's definitely something that has evolved. There have been times where I made my coffee the night before and literally rolled out of bed and chugged it and prayed. That worked really well until I was so sleep deprived. I had the flu, the worst I've ever had in my life.
Mm.
I was a little bit overdoing it there. There were times where I had to keep my devotional book in the bathroom, because I knew I would visit there several times a day, generally by myself,
Yeah.
and we'd have 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, to meet our Lord in a semi-quiet place. So yeah, it's nowadays I take my kids to school every morning, and I'm able to stay and go to mass with them, and then stay and pray for a little bit afterwards, or drive home and pray at the chapel, or sometimes just pray here at home. Yesterday was a little bit topsy-turvy, and I ended up praying at my kitchen table, which is not typical because usually it's so full of people. But it was a very sweet little time to be sitting in my chair, my place, and just kind of meeting Jesus in a place where I'm normally not connecting with him in an intimate way,
Mhm.
because of the bodies of people I love being all around me. So
The beauty of motherhood.
there's so much to it.
Oh, that's very helpful. Thank you. If you could go back to your first 5 years of marriage, what would you do differently, and what would you keep the same? I think this is a great question to end on.
Yeah. So what I would keep the same is being open to life. Um, yeah. Our fourth child is a senior in high school right now, and he did his first college visit by himself. And I don't know, there's just something about having them close together and having them come when they would, when God ordained them to.
Mhm.
Mm. It was hard, it was a lot, and I wouldn't change anything about it. Um, yeah. So that's what I wouldn't change. I don't know, you sent this to me before, and I'm glad you did. I don't It's a hard question to answer. I feel like I'm a different person now,
Yeah.
honestly. So, I don't know what I could have gone back to tell myself that I would have believed, you know? And maybe that's just a witness to the transformational power of Jesus Christ in the sacrament. And when we really give him space to work and allow ourselves to be vulnerable with him,
Mm.
and bring to him all of our deep feelings, our grief, our anger, our shame, our fear, that when we can really just be brutally honest with him and allow him to show up, and he does, in our pain, like, that is where all of a sudden he stops being just this caricature or this person on a crucifix or someone that I believe in my mind is the God of the universe, and I endeavor to love and serve. But he becomes so much more real and powerful and just, yeah, everything. So I think I would have gone back to, like, when I look at pictures of my younger mom self, I just would say, like, "You're so good." And I don't think she would have heard it. She'd be like, "Okay, yeah, 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 sure, you're saying that. What do you want?" But I think I would just say, what you're doing matters and it's hard. It won't always be this physically taxing.
Mhm.
Um, and you are building something that's lasting. And that's not nothing. It feels like nothing, especially being in the home, being isolated, being insulated. It feels really heavy and really hard. And I get it and I see you and that makes sense. And there's more for you. Just keep staying faithful and flexible and rolling with it and showing up, whether it's prayer or in loving your spouse or loving your children. So, yeah.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. One last thing. How do you feel like you've mentioned, like I'm such a different person now than I was before. And I love that you're saying this because I think, throughout the years of marriage, sometimes you hear people be like, well, he changed or, I grew, I'm different. And sometimes that's looked at as a bad thing. Like, why are you so different than when we first started dating? But the reality is like we grow and we evolve over time and as we enter into new seasons, and that's inevitable. So if you could just let us in a little bit, like how has marriage changed you? In what ways do you feel like you see yourself now and you're like, wow, like, yeah, I'm a different person. Like in what ways?
That would be a whole other podcast.
I'm sure.
For me, and we talk about this in the book in the chapter on your family of origin. For me, the wheels really came off when we had been married for like 18 years. And all of a sudden, I had three things happen in a row, and I couldn't keep doing motherhood and being a wife and the way I just saw the world and everything in the same way. And it really was a stripping of who I was, of how I interacted, of all that I held dear, in a variety of ways. And so I really entered into a time of deep healing, of introspection, of prayer. Started going to therapy regularly, not just like, oh, a little bit here and oh, I think I'm okay here, but really just dove in. And it was when I finally said, okay, I need help. I don't want to feel this deep heaviness and this ache and this raw anymore, that I want to enter in. That's when, yeah, that I feel like Jesus was like, okay, awesome. We can do this now. Now that you're here, that you see it, that you want it too. Yeah, that he was able to really show up and show me new things. I feel like I had to Marie Kondo my soul. You know, remember
Yeah,
that Netflix
I know
show?
who that is.
Yeah, the life-changing magic of tidying up. I feel like we had to go through so many things inside and kind of hold it up and say, "Does this spark joy?" And Jesus, where do you see this in my life? And are we gonna keep it, or where are we gonna put it? How are we gonna encounter it? Or is it something we need to let go of?
Mhm.
Yeah, and continually doing that. And then just growing in confidence of what has been put inside of me, like my own giftings, my charisms, the things that I'm starting to realize even more, have always been there, though they weren't safe to be seen for a long time. So, yeah, it's more just growing in confidence in him and confidence in how he's made me and in confidence that he's still with me and fashioning me and
Beautiful.
more and more in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Just thank you for your vulnerability and your openness today as a more seasoned wife to share with us, newer wives, just how to lean into the Lord in this vocation. It's been a beautiful conversation. Where can people find your book?
Yeah, so our book is on ascensionpress.com, I think it is. And it's also on Amazon. So yeah,
You-
wherever books are sold.
Perfect. We'll make sure to link it in the show notes.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Beth.
You're welcome. God bless you.